Welcome to 502 Conversations. I'm Brian Kirby, and my guest today is Australian Richard Saunders. Do you mind being? Do you mind that I said Australian Richard Saunders?
Well, it's correct, so we'll go with that. Yes.
Okay, I wasn't going to say it, but then I said, well, you know, what the heck, I'll put it in. So, Richard Saunders, I have a bio on you, which I will read, even though I know the information. I want to make sure I get everything in there.
All right.
You're a skeptic,
Yes.
a podcaster,
Yes.
and a professional origamist.
Yes.
Twice you have been president of the Australian Skeptics, and you're a lifetime member.
Mm-hmm.
You are a founder, or the founder, of Sydney Skeptics in the Pub, is that correct?
That's correct.
Co-host of the Skeptic Zone podcast, and a fellow of CSI Committee for Skeptical Inquirer.
That's right, yeah.
Author of 20 books on origami.
Yes.
20 books on origami. Co-founded the Mystery Investigators show in Australia and produced the Vaccination Chronicles documentary in 2014, which... Is that correct?
That's correct.
And just briefly, the Vaccination Chronicles are stories told by people who had relatives that suffered from diseases that are preventable.
That's right.
Before you go on, though, one more thing in your bio.
Could see it was.
He is one of George Hrab's favorite people.
Oh, that's
I just
nice.
learned that today, so
That's
I thought
nice.
I put that in. And favorite is spelled O-U in this bio. Okay, so I guess we can start with the. I didn't mean to start here, but tell me the Vaccination Chronicles.
Yeah, well, this is something that was in the back of my mind for a long time, because in Australia and around the skeptical world, we're fighting misinformation, and the anti-vaccination crowd, the movement, is a strong source of misinformation. And I was wondering what we could do to show young parents that there is this information, and the idea occurred to me is that the young parents of the day today don't know what their grandparents' generation went through. We don't see these diseases. You know, we don't see children in calipers and wheelchairs from polio.
And why is that?
And why is that? That's a very good question. And I thought, well, if young parents could at least hear reports and stories from people who were there at the time and saw their brothers or their sisters, or one elderly lady we interviewed, her mother died when this lady was only a baby, so she never knew her mother, from diphtheria, I think it was, that it would at least remind young parents that these diseases were real, they were devastating, and they had a terrible effect on society, and now they're all but gone. And
did you also have some vintage photography for that, or was
Yes,
it all you did?
We did.
So because the picture is very effective.
What I did is I went to the archives. The name eludes me at the moment, but of course the newsreel footage from the 40s or the 30s, the 40s, and the 50s is now publicly available. It's way long out of copyright, so people are free to use that for research purposes or whatever. Mainly it just sits in some digitized vault, never viewed, because there's thousands upon thousands of hours. So I did a search for things like polio vaccination and bits and pieces like that, and I was able to use some of these clips within the documentary, the wider documentary.
And gosh, we got off onto a serious note here.
We did.
I'm sorry, but it doesn't prohibit any frivolity later. It's interesting because, you know, I don't know if you know this or not, but I interviewed Dr. Paul Offit last year.
Oh, yeah.
And I asked about, in the Northwest United States, there had been an outbreak of measles or something in an isolated community where there was a majority of people, or at least a large enough number, not vaccinated. And he said a great thing. He said, nothing educates like the disease. So it's one thing if you read about it someplace in this isolated community, but it actually broke out and they traced it back to Disneyland, where a lot of people go. And then people started to get concerned. And it's an odd thing how you can be anti-vax until it really hits you at home. And I think one of, I was going to say Dr. Saunders, but that wouldn't, what should I call you? Richard Saunders?
Richard.
Mr. Saunders? Richard hosted a panel earlier today, and one of the women on the panel mentioned that in Australia, you'll have to correct me on this, but if you don't vaccinate, they remove benefits from your health services?
Yeah.
And once that was done and it hit some people in the pocketbook, the vaccination...
changed their minds quickly.
Can you speak, did you...
Yes, well, that was a scheme by our government, which is called no jab, which we don't like the word jab, but there it is, no jab, no pay, which
And it's
means,
not really a scheme either, because it's, unless it means something different in your...
It possibly is a translation problem.
Okay.
It's a plan. A
plan.
plan is a much better word. where the government said to parents, vaccination is not mandatory in Australia. That's a myth. If people say that, it's to scare. But if you don't have your children up to date with on the vaccination schedule, you may miss out on certain government benefits in the way of payments for children or things like that. So that worked very well. And, well, it worked for a lot of parents who probably would vaccinate, but it slipped their mind, or they weren't too worried about it, or they weren't particularly anti-vaccination. So a lot of parents who...
Just sloppy?
Just sloppy, just, should have vaccinated but didn't get around to it, suddenly did, because they could see the real benefits. And I imagine a lot of those people too were hesitant about vaccination but then came around. So generally speaking, it was a good scheme, plan.
And we've spoken of this like it's common. I'm not sure how to say it. We haven't even talked about the anti-vax movement and all the evidence that supports vaccination. I don't really want to get into that because it's so, somebody listening right now, what are these guys talking about? They're just assuming it's effective. But, do you want to...
Well, for a brief time, because it's such an important part of what we do in Australia, is fighting the misinformation
that
from
part of what we
anti-vaccination.
do, you mean we the skeptics?
We the skeptics,
okay, go on.
In the broader skeptical movement in Australia. And my part of it, the Vaccination Chronicles, was just a little part of the overall work that we're doing. I was glad to do it. I happened to have learned over the many years video editing skills and production skills and things like that. So I was able to not only run around and film these people, but I could technically put it together, which saved a lot of time trying to find somebody else to do it.
Yes.
But in the broader Australian skeptics movement, it's one of the things that we concentrate on, amongst everything else, of course. And my colleague, Dr. Rachel Dunlop, who was on the panel today, is quite involved in fighting the misinformation from the anti-vaccination lobby as well.
And I think in this country, I'm not sure because I was subject to it, but I don't have children. I think most places you can't register your child for school unless they're up to date, or if you have a legitimate medical concern, such as a compromised immune system. And then there are places where they will give you a religious exemption, which to me is...
That's gone in Australia. There's
totally gone.
No religious exemption. That's gone, yeah. We're not as... there are pockets in Australia, but generally speaking, we're not a really big religious society. So that wasn't a big issue.
And one of the things I was going to say is Australia now officially smarter than the United States for two reasons, at least two reasons. That part of it, with the making great strides in the combat against anti-vaccination, but something that just came up recently that you have podcasted about, is that a verb?
It is now.
You've podded about, was it's now illegal for your health funds to reimburse certain natural remedies?
It will be.
I may have bungled that, but...
The plan from the government, not the scheme, we'll say.
Did it start in the government? Just go tell me the story.
Well, because of the fact that things like homeopathy repeatedly fail independent testing around the world. And other governments have realised this, and government-run testing in the UK, for example, has shown this. And because of lobbying from people like a group in Australia called the Friends of Science and
Before you go on too long, brief description of homeopathy. I know what you're talking about, but just in case someone's watching this and they go, what do you mean homeopathy doesn't work? I go to CVS, it's on the shelf.
Right.
How can it... So briefly homeopathy super quick is...
Homeopathy super quick is what you're buying is either a vial of liquid or sugar, or another vial of sugar pills that don't have ingredients. In other words, they're just liquid. It's just
no
water.
Active ingredients.
No active ingredients. Or when I say ingredients, or just sugar pills. You're buying nothing. You're buying a placebo. And that's what that's what they sell. They say it's what the ingredients are vibrations of memories of substances that once were in it. This is just mumbo jumbo. It's ridiculous. It doesn't work that way. So the world doesn't work that way. So, and governments are discovering this, because science bears this out. You can't just give somebody a placebo and expect it to cure their disease. It doesn't work like that. They might feel better for a moment because they think they've taken something. So that, along with Reiki, which is the mystical transmission of energy through the heavens, through your hands into the person's body, based on no evidence, no good evidence whatsoever. These mystical energies don't exist. So many of those modalities for years have been covered via private health companies, saying you sign up with us and we'll cover your trip to the naturopath or the Reiki master or the whatever. And the government has said, have announced plans to say that I think next year, from April next year, that will no longer be a legal thing for those companies to do. I think in the long term, the government are trying, because we have socialised medicine in Australia, the government just realised that A, these things don't work, so they shouldn't be promoted or sponsored, and B, it's in the long run it'll save money not to have reimbursements for things that don't work anyway.
Right.
Yeah.
Because then they just have to seek treatment anyway.
Yeah. Well,
So it's
there's an economic reason.
Let's give you a $50 vial of water. Of course, it doesn't work, so you still have to go seek treatment. So we're just wasting money.
Wasting money. Yeah.
An interesting thing, I'm sorry to mention Dr. Offit again, we talked about his book, Bad Faith. I did not know, and he told me this, that in this country, Christian Science nurses who pray, you can call them on the phone, they don't even come over, they pray for you, or your child, I'm sorry. There have been some devastating cases of children's dying from preventable diseases because they were never really examined and they're getting worse. Okay, so then the family sues the Christian Science nurse who has been reimbursed from an insurance company. But when they get to court, they claim religious freedom, and they won based on that. Wow. So it's like this bizarre religious freedom, but I'm reimbursed from an insurance company, and so they don't have malpractice insurance and all that stuff.
It's complex. So it's very complex.
It doesn't seem that complex. Well, it seems fairly simple. So, except it seems to become a complex issue because it's very difficult. I mean, I can't imagine, first of all, a judge tossing the case so easily, but also one story like that in the news should make an immediate referendum to take care of that problem. Was it difficult in your country to get the legislation?
Well, it's been announced.
It's been announced.
It's been announced. That's what the government planned to do. And as far as I know, the opposition party in Australia have no concerns about this, so it's fully expected it will pass. But from now until then, what I expect to see, and I will next week when I'm back in Australia, is the counterattack from the alternative medical people.
And that's in this. I don't know how it works in Australia, but in this country, it's a huge lobby, and they just basically lie to legislators that don't have time. I'm from Massachusetts. I'm not from Massachusetts, but I now live in Massachusetts. Just recently, the law was signed into law about naturopaths licensing themselves, which I was shocked that passed. Because you know some of those treatments, sit in the middle of the road after you inhale incense and tears from a weeping young virgin and all these, obviously they don't know what it is. Well, but they are very organized and lobby to get these things through. Is it the same in your country? Are you allowed to? It is.
Yeah, well, not exactly the same too, but organized, yes. And they'll lobby
and vocal?
And they will be vocal and they will. And if I was them, I would do the same thing if I felt my livelihood and what I believe to be true was under threat.
Okay, so you think they believe it to be true? It's not fraud to you?
That's an interesting question. At the end of the day, if it works, it works. If it doesn't work, it doesn't work. And what the person who peddles it or sells it believes is neither here nor there. But from another point of view, most of the people I deal with, and I deal mostly with people who believe they're psychic and things like that, all the way to homeopaths. Most of them I've met sincerely believe it's real, it works, and this is the way things are. So from their point of view,
this is the way things are. That's an important statement. This is the way reality works.
Absolutely. So then they get into conspiracy theories. So if I'm a homeopath and I know it works, because my patients tell me it works, and I know, there's no question about it. There are skeptics out there, but I know homeopathy works. And now the government are cracking down on it. I'm going to have to assume that the government are being paid off by Big Pharma, so Big Pharma can protect their turf. And we get a lot of people think like that.
Well, let's point out in this country, though, Big Pharma is big homeopath manufacturers.
There's the interesting other side of the coin too. Yes, yeah.
So it's when you go to GNC, I don't even know if that exists anymore, but if you go to your drugstore in the United States and you pick up a bottle of a homeopathic potion, it's not a remedy, but it's not you know, your homeopath
From around
divining
the
and
corner.
his,
Yes,
you know,
right.
shaking it. This is a big business.
Yeah, yeah.
And I think one of the favorite things I've heard, which is kind of interesting, was from, I think it was a representative from the FDA who said, we're not really concerned with regulating homeopathic remedies because there's no active ingredients in them. And I thought, that's good? So what a interestingly dumb thing to say in a way.
Well, I mean, there's an argument that homeopathy doesn't exist.
Okay.
It's a process.
All right.
You take a droplet of coffee, for example. I'm not kidding. You put it into one drop into a glass of water, and you shake it. And you take a drop out of that, and you so on and so on and so on. By the end of it, you don't have any coffee left. It's just water. So is that a homeopathic product? It's just water. So that's an interesting thing. And of course, it can't harm you directly. The harm is if you take it thinking it's going to cure your condition and you don't take conventional medicine.
I remember someone had responded to me on Facebook. I had a link to a show, an interview I did with Harriet Hall. We talked about this.
Yeah.
Dr. Harriet Hall, sorry. And homeopathy came up, and this person self-described himself as a physician, but he did homeopathy and all this stuff. And I said, well, if you think homeopathy works, why don't you take a drop of gasoline, put it in 20 gallons of water, put it in your car? Right? Wouldn't that work?
Well,
water has memory, right? Water has
Yeah.
memory. It should.
That would be nice.
And so he just wrote back that I was caustic and offensive. But he didn't say. And I said, well, you're not answering the question, though.
Yeah, yeah. Well, the classic answer to all those sort of things is, oh, it doesn't work like that.
Well,
That's all I have to say. It doesn't work like that. You don't know what you're talking about.
okay.
There you are. You see? I should be a homeopath.
And one of the common things also is people say, well, we better hope water doesn't have memory.
Yes.
Because there's only so much and it's recycled.
It's been through a lot.
It's been through a
Every
lot.
time we drink something, that water's been through a lot.
All right, let's move on to more fun stuff.
Okay.
So one of your favorite things, though, maybe we can have a little fun with this, not necessarily, but I read that one of your favorite things is water divining?
Oh, wow. Yes, you have been reading, yes. Water dividing and water dowsing, water witching, it's called, is the folk art, I guess you'd say, something like that, of people in the countryside using twigs, sticks, pendulums, metallic rods, anything like that. Walking along, they get a reaction from their particular device, usually a stick which will move down, move up, or a rod which will swing from side to side. And they'll say, this is where the water is. If you dig here, you'll find water. And this is a very commonly held belief in the countryside in Australia and around the world, I think.
Yeah, my neighbor in Maine claimed that he couldn't do it, but his father was really good at it.
Yeah. And if you see it, if you see somebody who calls themselves a water diviner or a water dowser, it's interchangeable, and they walk along and their rods move, it looks very convincing. It really does. But we've known for many years now, through the work of people like Ray Hyman, who was here, and James Randi, who couldn't be here this time, there's something called the ideomotor action. And this is the subconscious movements of the muscles of the body, in this case the hand, which tilts slightly and causes the rods or the pendulum to move or the sticks to move. And it's the water diviners themselves twitching their hands. But it's called the ideomotor action because you don't realize it's happening. They don't know. As far as they're concerned, there's a mystical force coming from the ground, from the water, the hidden water, which is making the rods move. And it's fascinating. And
Have you done many experiments?
Oh,
or
yeah.
Video? Okay.
many in
Why is this
in
one of your
Australia.
favorite things, though?
It's a classic. It's a great education
I guess
for new skeptics,
Okay.
because it is a classic claim of the paranormal, the supernatural, something that science doesn't know about. It's interesting to watch, observe, and it's a really good phenomenon to test. And especially to new skeptics, you can set up a test to show them how to test lots of different claims. You can do double-blind testing with it, single-blind testing with it. You can do randomization, all this revolving around a paranormal claim. And I really enjoyed doing that. In fact, I did another documentary called The Mighty Mitter Muster Water Divining Test.
Oh, my.
All about water diviners in a little country town in Australia called Mitter. which is just beautiful in the mountains, and every year they have what they call the local show, which I guess you'd call here a county fair, like that.
Yep.
And there's horses, and there's people bringing their cakes and all this sort of thing. And for 3 years, some years back now, they had a water divining challenge run by Australian Skeptics. And lots of people, we call them bushies, people from the bush, people from the outback, people from the countryside, who are sure they can water divine. They all turned up with their wires and their sticks and everything, and they all tried and they all failed.
And one of the more interesting things, and I'm sure I'm susceptible to this myself, as we all are, is that they can fail the test 10 times, 9 out of 10 times, or let's put it at a chance. Well, they can fail the test 7 times out of 10, maybe get 3 times right. We'll call that chance.
Yes.
But it has no effect on.
No.
Have you? That's the interesting thing. They'll leave and say, "Well, I know it works. This, just what do they say?" Have you ever had any? Answer it in 2 parts. What do they say? And have you ever had somebody go, "Whoa, I guess it doesn't work," and toss their sticks?
Well, the second answer is no.
Never.
Never. The first part is, depends on the water diviner, depends on the conditions, depends on what we're doing. But what their brain is doing is rescuing the situation. Again, it's like the homeopaths. So the water diviners know it works. There's no question. There's no doubt. This is not even a concept in their heads that it doesn't work, because they've seen it work. They do it. They're paid for it. This is their life, Their dad did it, etc.
That's one.
And they're walking along and the rods move. So to say to them it doesn't work is crazy. It's just, you might as well be speaking another language to them. It doesn't make any sense. So when they fail the tests, their brain will reach for a reason as to why. And it normally revolves around the test wasn't set up correctly, or the skeptics are trying to disrupt the energy flow, or one case some guy said that a metal fence nearby interfered with his divining rods, or then they'll say, I can't divine still water, because a lot of the tests are bottles of water, yet before the tests begin, we have them divine still water to show us it really works. It doesn't matter. To them, they're coming up with an excuse that makes sense, and they've saved their view of reality.
Now, when they say the test wasn't, the first thing you said, the test wasn't, you didn't say fair, but...
set up properly, or they would say fair or something like that.
But before they start the test, do you explain how the test is? Did they agree to the setup and the process?
Yeah.
But then after it fails, it wasn't set up,
after they because they have to come up with a reason. Something as dramatic as failing something you do every day, you can't just walk away from that.
They must fail in reality, though, so they must charge money for this. So my well's gone dry.
Yeah.
Call a dowser. So I call a dowser. A guy comes over there. Here's the water. I spend $3,000 to have a rig come in and drill it.
Yeah.
There's no water there.
Yeah.
Or, I don't know if they give depths when they do dowsing, but
they do.
Okay, so that makes a big difference, because if they say water's at 40 feet and it's really at 200, because you can find water with a well drilling.
Yeah.
Because my well is 275 feet deep in Maine.
Oh wow.
So if they told me that it was at 40 feet, do you know how much extra it costs to go 275 feet?
Quite a bit. But they'll come up with the same reasons.
But I've just spent $3,000 and didn't find water when I drew.
Then they should have a guarantee. I don't know if they do.
I'm sure they don't.
They
probably give you your $50 back.
Well, I would hope so. But again, to them, they might even admit they fail. They might say, every now and then, although some of I've met claim 100% accuracy. But again, they would find a reason as to why. Oh, yeah, the cloud cover that day. That's right, the cloud cover. It wasn't, I should have thought about that, or anything. I mean, I'm not as inventive as they are. It's amazing.
Well, while we're on this subject, I think it would be remiss of me not to point out that not only on your own you've done this, but you've been part of the JREF $1 million.
Yes.
JREF, James Randi Educational Foundation. I'll let you describe the $1 million challenge. Most people probably know.
Well,
go ahead.
For many years, the James Randi Educational Foundation, James Randi himself had a large prize of money. It varied, but it was famously $1 million for anybody who could prove, demonstrate paranormal, occult, supernatural, any claim under proper observing conditions.
Observing conditions.
Agreeable tests. The JREF, the James Randi people, were happy with the way the test was conducted. The person claiming the power was happy that the test was good and fair and right and they could do it. Then the test goes forward. And I was involved in about 5 or 6 of those right here in Las Vegas, yeah.
And now that you've described it, we'll get more detail. James Randi himself kind of pulled back from that because he let other people administer the test. And so he wasn't directly involved for a reason, I'm sure, because he's a well-known skeptic, and that would be objectionable, I suppose?
To some people, to some people it was, and Randy always said he didn't have to be there.
Right.
As long as the test was done by his representatives and it was done in a scientific manner, Randy actually didn't have to be present.
Right, of course not.
Although a lot of people didn't mind if Randy was there.
Oh, they didn't?
Course.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And in the ones in Las Vegas, although Randy was there, he let the nuts and bolts and the mechanics of it, the putting it all together, he led it to myself and some other people.
So let's talk about, I don't know if you want to describe one in specific, but you devised properly controlled conditions, the participant agrees, and you were the administrator, which would mean that you were kind of like the MC of the event, but you didn't know exactly how it was working because I've seen some of these on YouTube,
oh, right.
and they last for quite a while.
Yes.
Because, you give people
every opportunity.
Right.
Well, no, the ones I was involved with, I would be on stage doing something, taking part of whatever the process was. There was 4 or 5 of us involved. Banachek the magician famously was more or less the MC.
Okay.
But we all met as a committee for the whole time we were doing the amazing meeting, which is over days. We would meet for hours and meet with the person wanting to take the claim to make sure that the test was fair.
And these are agreeable meetings?
Oh yeah, they were fine. Oh yeah.
The participants, I mean.
Yes, absolutely.
They would agree
I can't remember one time we had a meeting with the participant before the test when they were objecting or they were being unreasonable or anything like that. They were very happy. We were very happy. It was a lot of work because
I'll bet.
You'd sit there or do you sit there? Now, if we do this, does this happen? And it's just
a lot of minute detail.
And we filmed a lot of that simply for archival reasons and to show that, because a lot of people think that we don't do this properly. We documented it to say years down the track, if anybody's saying, you skeptics, you're trying to con people, we say, well, here's the evidence to show that we went to great lengths to make it fair. We wouldn't do a test if it wasn't fair. We wouldn't do a test unless there was a real chance that the person could pass if they had the power.
And let's make that point because you want to know.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
You're not trying to prove everything wrong.
No.
If something works, gosh, the world will be turned on its head.
It would be, yeah.
So you want to know.
We want to know, and we want to be fair. It's just being polite. I mean, someone's come all the way to Las Vegas. They've been corresponding with us for a long time, and they've arrived, and they're going to do a show. We're not going to be rude to them or cheat them or do anything like that. It's just a matter of common courtesy.
Yeah. Skeptic it's funny though, because skeptic has a certain connotation to it. So I try to tell people it really means thoughtful. And
That's good, I'll remember that, yes.
But I've been told I have a very transparent vibe. So I would not be a good part of that committee because when I'm talking to a psychic or a medium or something, it's just very difficult for me to not let my physiognomy, that's my facial expressions or whatever.
No, you'd be all right because a lot of it is purely mechanical. How do we sit? Where do you stand? If you do this, is your claim that if you push here, does this happen? It's just a lot of working things out. And it's a very interesting process. And we don't sit around, when we did it, we're not sitting around trying to change the person's mind or convince them the power doesn't work.
No, you're establishing a fair test.
We're just establishing a fair test. And we'll let the test speak for itself.
Now, have you gotten close to, has anything happened to make you think, whoa, there's something going on here? Did everybody fail miserably? Did anybody get close? I mean,
everyone fails. Now, miserably or not is...
Define a failure rate, because I see these on YouTube and you'd give somebody 10 opportunities.
Yeah.
It's not like they're going to miss the first time and the test is over.
Well, define a fail. Every test has a different criteria.
You would define a failure, right?
Yes.
Okay.
We have to. We have to know before we start the test, if you get this many, you pass. If you don't, you fail. So we're all on the same page. And we don't do the test unless the psychic or whatever says, yes, that's it. If I get this many, I know I've passed. If I get this many, then I have failed your certain test. That's normal science. You know, you've got to set those criteria. And it depends on how accurate they think they are. The rule of thumb is something like if they can beat odds of 1,000 to 1 or something like that, or 1,000,000 to 1, depending on the test.
But that doesn't mean 1,000,000 repetitions.
It does not, no.
Okay.
But, you know, if they've got the power they claim, it could be 1,000,000,000 to 1. They'd still pass.
Right.
Yeah.
And have you seen anything that gave you pause or that seemed to look...
Not really. No, and people get surprised. They think, oh, I must have seen someone nearly, or so, but no, not really. When you break it down and you do a scientific test like that, it's black and white in the end.
And do you interview post failure so the
Yes.
people seem a little down or a little depressed, or they leave I mean, because they're coming in thinking they're going to prove this because there's no doubt that it works, and they've shown their friends,
Yeah.
and they don't know how it works,
Yeah.
but they're eager to show you that it works, and then you can figure out how it works later.
Yeah, and it's happened at these meetings where immediately after, and the person's failed, they'll stick around and they'll be interviewed on stage. Or in one case, there was a press conference afterwards, and during that time, their minds are racing like the water diviners to find a reason for failure. The mind has to satisfy itself. And in one case, one lady who said she could look through envelopes to see hidden cards, and she failed. It took her a little while, but then she accused the James Randi Educational Foundation of cheating later on her blog or something like that. And another guy we tested for magic power bands, which give you more strength.
Yeah, those are my favorite.
He was philosophical, and he left shortly afterwards, and then sometime in the not too distant past after that, he also wrote a blog which made everything right to him and showed how he actually passed the test after all.
Did you give him the $1 million?
Strangely, no.
One of the most bizarre examples of that, to me, is when you're testing a medium or a psychic and they don't pass the test. And then they say that, well, failing the test means I actually passed it,
Yeah.
because that proves that the spirits know they're being tested and they refuse to cooperate.
And I've seen this. I've seen this firsthand. It's a brilliant way to not only maintain the belief in the supernatural, but also they credit their spirits or their angels with this power. It's remarkable. Yeah. But it's a brilliant out. I didn't really fail, but my spirit guides were teaching me a lesson.
And what is the lesson?
The lesson is, well,
Don't test me?
don't get to don't let your ego get in the way of things. Anything, it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter to them. They found a real reason as to why they failed, and the real reason enforces the supernatural.
Okay, let's take it out of the testing realm and now defend this. Or don't defend this, or explain this to me, and I apologize if I've gone down this road before with other people, but I think I did recently. But I want to hear what you have to say about this. I have seen people react positively to a reading. They leave comforted, or they feel better, or they have a more positive outlook. All right? So, and the psychic or the medium can say, I am doing work here. I am helping people. And strangely, they define, if somebody says, oh, you will have, if a psychic says you will have good fortune, I always want to know, well, does that mean I'm going to find a quarter, or I'm going to be able to take a left-hand turn in busy traffic? What does that mean? Nobody ever kind of nails that down. But, so what do you say to that kind of rationale that, you know, my psychic told me it was going to be, you know, the next month there'll be some positive outcomes, although I may hit some bumps in the road.
Yeah.
Literally, when I left here, I hit a bump in the road, but, you know, then somebody let me take a left-hand traffic.
Yeah.
So what do you say?
Well, it's comforting. And people have a belief. The people who go to psychics aren't normally skeptics. They're believers in the psychic and the psychic power. So
Not always,
go,
though. People can go in skeptical and say, I can't believe how that person
oh, right, okay,
nailed
I
me.
see your point. Yeah, and this is.
And then they're a believer.
This is a trick with the word skeptic. When I say a skeptic, I mean somebody
Oh, okay.
who's educated in the process of cold reading,
All right.
and who knows what's happening. But yes, you're right. A skeptical, shall we say, person who doesn't really know, they might say, "Oh, I'm a skeptic," but they don't know the mechanics of it. Yes, of course, because psychic readings in this situation, they're popular. People go, and they'll go back, and they'll get a lot out of it, and they'll feel better. And this is what we call the feedback loop, because when they come back to the psychic, they'll tell the psychic, "I've come back. You were so good last time, and I've brought my mother," or something like that. But undoubtedly, and it would be silly for me to say otherwise, people will walk away from a psychic reading at least feeling better or amused or entertained or comforted or something like that. Now, that is almost, it's a parallel issue, I guess. It doesn't mean the psychic reading wasn't fake or cold reading or psychological. But you know what? If people get something out of it, I can't say they don't. You know, that's just what happens. My stronger interest is in the fact that they're getting something out of psychology and not the paranormal. See, at heart, I'm still looking for the paranormal angle. You know, if it really is a psychic reading, I want to know about it. I want to know if they're really channeling dead people and things like that. But it's like the homeopathy. People go to a homeopath, they get a box of sugar pills, and they take those and they will feel comforted. They might even be less stressed when getting on an aeroplane or something, or think their cold's getting better. That's real.
And I guess I would say also when you go to see a medium, a medium that's specific. We'll go from psychics right into mediums. Is that you're kind of in a very vulnerable position anyway. So they're gonna, if they, someone's telling you that, "Oh, don't worry, little Jenny's fine and she's with grandma." I mean,
well, it's the role of religion for years, of course.
Okay, but to me, that's giving someone that kind of hope or helping them in that way really is not helping or hoping.
You make a good point. It's a whole other interesting avenue to explore. But in the very short term, if you go to a medium and they tell you that your dead grandfather's doing okay, and you walk out with a happy feeling, I can't deny people get that happy feeling. But again, we go back to...
but you want to know the truth.
I want to know the truth. And there are arguments that say that, well, ultimately, they're getting a false comfort. But are they, they feel better? The people taking the homeopathy aren't getting real medicine, but they might feel better. The person going to their religious figure, and their religious figure says, "Don't worry, your grandfather is in a better place," are getting a great comfort out of that too. Yeah.
Well, I heard something recently that made me think of something to ask a medium, and that is that when did this start? Because, if you talk to Richard, you don't talk to him, but if you read his books or anthropology, and you'll find out that humans have been around more or less like we are for 100,000 years, 200,000 years. When did the spirit world start? And then how many? I never thought of it like this, but so you're seeing my grandma, but golly, isn't it crowded in the spirit world?
Isn't it crowded?
What do you? In fact. Never mind biology and anthropology. Why doesn't the medium give us some more information about what happened 100,000 years ago? Wouldn't that be that would be something?
You think they could?
When did fire start? Who invented the wheel?
And if you go back far enough, if you were, for the sake of argument, let's say we died and we went to a heaven, and there was in my case my father. Oh, great, there's my father, and he said, "Meet your grandfather." "Oh, grandfather." And my grandfather said, "You know what? I came to heaven and my dad was here." And on from thousands upon thousands of generations. And one day it's going to be, well, hang on, these people aren't looking human anymore. What's going on? Back to the fish. You see what I mean?
That'd be something. Now I know why paradise is for eternity. It'd take all that long to meet your relatives.
It'd take that long to meet your relatives.
Here's Uncle Bob. He looks like a rock to me. Oh, here's a neutron star. This is where Jane came from.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's interesting to contemplate that, but the day-to-day mediums, I don't think that would ever cross their mind. They're interested in connecting people with people they knew, more or less.
But think of the vast amounts of information we would have about our own history.
Yeah.
What was it like when John Hancock signed the Declaration? I mean, I'm just saying, forget the history, forget archival footage.
They would say it was hot and smelly. It's better now. I don't know.
I'm just scheming up like I'm scheming. It's just all these interesting
But we can play these little mind exercises, but it makes a very good point. When people die there, some part of them goes to somewhere else, then yeah, there would be a lot of people there.
And you can talk to them. I mean, think of the history books you could write.
Yeah, yeah. But again, going back through the generations, it would get ridiculous after a while.
Now, I know that mediums and psychics, you give them the standard, why don't you win the lottery? And they're, oh, well, I would never use my power to benefit myself kind of thing, except when I charge people $100 an hour to come see me. But, you know, okay, you're not going to use your powers to enrich yourself. How about writing a decent history book? I guess the referencing would be a little bit cumbersome.
That would be a bit cumbersome.
You
the
know
citations wouldn't work so well.
Now that I say this, some psychic is going to write a history book with no citations, and it'll become, you know, well, it came right from the spirit.
People do it. They call themselves channelers or things like that, and they write histories of Atlantis and stuff like
you're
that.
right. You're right.
Yeah.
All right. So I don't mean to offend you by this next question, but were you a large disappointment to your parents?
No, not at all.
And I ask that because
No.
I read that your father was. Now you told me Australia is less religious, you think, than the United States, but your father was a Methodist minister.
Methodist minister, yeah.
And so I'm assuming you grew up religious. He must have had his family at church, just like the president.
Oh yes, every week. Oh yeah, yeah. This was my upbringing from when I can remember. Dad was the minister at the church. Mum taught Sunday school. I went to church and Sunday school every week.
Did you, so before you go too deep into it, I'll give you a hierarchy of things I want to know. So did you believe what they said based on authority up to a certain age, and then you started to change your mind? Were you one of these kids that just never really took to it?
A little both. Yeah, I believed it wholeheartedly, but when you're a kid, you believe what your parents tell you.
I made a gross assumption here, though. No. I'm assuming, because you're a skeptic, but skepticism and atheism, I'm not sure they're synonymous, but I just made a gross assumption that your father was a minister, you're a skeptic, so you're an atheist.
Oh, right. Well,
so I'm sorry to make that assumption when I said, were you a disappointment?
No,
and I just said, did you grow out of it? I don't even know if you did. Maybe you're still a deist or something.
No, you make a good point. So when I was growing up, that was my everyday life. But it just became so routine after a while that when I stopped going regularly to church in my teens at somewhere along the way, I can't remember exactly when, it just wasn't a big deal to my mum and dad, which was really nice. And then when I got
into... a bit odd, I would think.
I'd have to go back and look at it. You know, it's hard to...
No, I understand, but I'm just thinking that ministers or Methodists and Sunday school teachers, it wasn't a big a deal that you would just...
It wasn't a huge deal, no. And then when I think my mum and dad at least had the sense of when their kids were growing up, they must find their own way, which was really nice, I think.
Wow, that...
Yeah. But then when I got into skepticism, my mum and dad didn't mind at all. They thought it was really interesting because it was what we call now the Bigfoot skepticism. I was interested in UFOs and monsters and crystal and what's all this about.
And they didn't see that as overlapping at all.
They didn't see, because they agreed.
Yeah, Bigfoot.
That's easy stuff.
Right.
That's
well, crystals, you're starting to get into supernatural, but okay.
But then again, they wouldn't think that they worked anyway.
Right.
And it never really got to the point where it was a big issue. And until my parents both died, it wasn't an issue. In fact, when I ended up on TV, being the skeptic on TV, on various TV shows, it was great fun for everybody, you know, to see their son on TV, and it was all good.
So are you an atheist?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Did you actually have to tell them that? Did you come out?
It never came out. It
nobody asked.
It just wasn't a very interesting topic, no. It just didn't.
So when you went home to visit, did you go to church just to see your dad do his thing?
Or occasionally, sure. Family events. He baptized my nephew, which was really a nice family moment, and I wouldn't deny that. And
good, yeah.
I went to, before my mum died, I made a point of going to church with her for Christmas church service, because that was more important than me running around with any, you know, ideology about atheism or anything like that, and that was really nice.
So it's kind of a, you can view it as a time for family to get together and do things, which is great.
Yeah,
and you don't have to, you know, don't have to get up on your soapbox at Christmas dinner and...
No, absolutely not. And it would be counterproductive, and it would ruin a precious family time. Other people have different situations in their family, of course. This is just from my...
Yeah, okay. I appreciate you speaking honestly about it. Also, I think Methodists is kind of easygoing anyway. There's a lot of different things in this. You weren't Pentecostal, you weren't evangelist, so I dated a woman whose her parents were Methodist ministers, and I actually don't think they believed in God at all. They were more like, this is good for other people.
Right.
You know what?
Yeah.
And it took me a while to realize that about them. And she was a wild.
Well, look, people are people.
So I was thinking, because I was raised Catholic, and I couldn't believe that these, the Methodist ministers, I'm thinking, they're really, it seems like more of a philosophy than an ultimate end game to them.
Yeah.
So
it depends on where you are in the world and
Yeah, sure.
what branch. And it depends on the individual, how they take it.
Sure. Richard Saunders, I'm grateful you came to speak. I hope this was fun for you. I mean, it seems that we went
Yes.
into a lot of different areas here.
Yeah, I really enjoy it, and I love coming to conventions around the world. It's just a long way to come each time.
Yeah.
That's the trouble.
We should mention that. I'm sorry, we are at SciCon 2017, Committee for Skeptical Inquiry Conference. My cameraman wanted to ask one question, and that was, how long did it take you? I mean, most people suffer jet lag,
Yeah.
but he's figuring that coming from Australia, you're having a problem with the gravity on this side of the world. How are you adjusting to that?
I can't wait to get
Don't
home
laugh.
to be upside down again. No, it's all right. Jet lag is a big problem for me. That's why I always fly out to any convention around the world. I get there at least, if I can possibly do it, 4 or 5 days early.
No kidding.
Oh yeah.
Just to settle in.
Just to settle in, because I figured if I'm going to the other side of the world, and the people expect me to be on stage and speak and know what I'm talking about and socialize and everything, I've got to be awake for a start. And so I make a point of doing that.
Great. 502 Conversations, I'm Brian Kirby, and my guest has been Richard Saunders, and I said my cameraman, not my cameraman. I apologize for that. Dan has been here all week doing this, but I shouldn't say my cameraman. He is the cameraman.
He's the cameraman, right?
Right. So I don't have one. He graciously came with me and worked alongside me all week. So thank you very much, Richard. I appreciate it.
Thank you.